Let me set the scene a little bit before we just jump in cold. So what has happened in the book up to this point, there has been a mass shooting, and like 60 or 70 people have been injured. There's like 40 something plus of them are dead. And so the doctors and trauma surgeons have spent the last 5 or 6 hours just triaging and rescuing and helping people. And so, stress is high, nerves are high, everybody's exhausted. And we join our protagonist, Joe, who is one of the leader doctors here at the hospital, and he's checking on the rest of the surgeons like a good leader would. He mentions earlier in the day they were joking and laughing, and now there's no sounds coming from the break room. So he's going in to investigate to make sure that morale is good, that there's no impending danger, nothing bad is happening. And that's where we join him in the story. I went to the break room to check on the trauma surgeons. Earlier, I had heard the 4 trauma surgeons telling jokes, swapping stories, and comparing notes on the patients, occasionally cracking an energy stick. But now, all was quiet. I stepped inside and immediately saw why. The quartet sat at the same table, around the light from someone's Zapman, but they were rigid in their chairs, their heads all turned in the same direction, off into the shadows, where a dark figure stood at the sink, banging things. Something metal clattered on the ground. There was a man's voice cursing, and then there was a ripping sound. I approached the surgeon's table, put my hand on the shoulder of one Dr. Stuart Rothenberg, who leapt out of his chair at my touch. He grabbed my sleeve and pulled me down toward him. "My God, Barnes," Rothenberg whispered. "This man is a lunatic, a danger to everybody." "Who?" I asked. "Hi, the night shift man," whispered Paddy McDermott, the Irish-born Almachius trauma surgeon at the table. "The creepy jerk he is, walks in here without a word to anyone, goes over there, cuts the lights, and starts smashing and bashing things. The knacker." The 2 other surgeons, reinforcements from Clara Mass, nodded. "Did anyone ask him what he's doing?" I said. "Stewart said something to him about 20 minutes ago, but your man didn't answer. It's like he's in some kind of trance. The freaky jerk," McDermott said. "The man is a menace, an absolute nut," Rothenberg said. "I'll talk to the guy," I said, stepping toward the figure. "He's gonna have his hands full tonight." The silhouette came clearer into view as my eyes adjusted to the dark. The man was standing over the sink, scrubbing furiously at something. I saw the suds flying. I considered approaching and placing a hand on the man's shoulder, but decided better of it. Best not to startle someone who may be holding something sharp at the sink, I realized. Instead, I drifted to the other side of the counter, a row of switches near the appliances in the fridge. With a sweep of my hand, the lights for the whole room popped on. Calling stood there, soap dripping, squinting in the new brightness. In his hand was a soaking piece of fabric. "Hey, Chuck," I said in my most jovial voice. "What are you up to?" Calling stood, blinking. For a moment, he seemed stunned, like a wild animal caught in headlights. But he shook his head and rumpled the wet fabric. "Stains on my overalls. Figured I'd work on it a bit before my shift started," Culling said. "In the dark, you knacker?" McDermott called out. "Fluorescent paint. It's actually easier to see in the dark," Culling said, turning to face the darkened panel of surgeons. Then turning to the sink, he shrugged nonchalantly. "You bloody Mick bastard." "You bloody," McDermott shouted, rising from his chair. But the other surgeons leapt to restrain him, shouts erupting. Culling and I were the only ones who hadn't moved. "Why fluorescent paint?" I asked, raising my voice amid the scuffle. Culling put the white togs down on the rim of the sink and turned to face me. "What is this? 20 questions? My shift doesn't start for another 15 minutes, Culling said. He placed his sponge next to the overalls and folded his arms on his chest. "What do you really want, doctor?" I scratched my head, taken aback by the nurse's hostility. "Just wanted to prepare you for tonight, Chuck. Don't know if you heard about the massacre today." "I heard something.
Innocent people dead, totally tragic, etc.
Without a change in expression, Colling turned back to the sink, picked up the sponge and fabric, and started scrubbing again. Something about his body language was off. After a moment's pause, I kept talking. It was even worse than February, what some people call the Bayonne bloodbath, I said. But you weren't here for that one.
No, I was not. But we got some of the spillover at my last place. Most of them, I ended up dying.
He scrubbed harder, grimacing downward at his garment.
Lots of sepsis. It was filthy. Disgusting, actually.
I nodded slowly. This should be a bit easier. Since we took care of most of the initial triage, you just have to keep them alive overnight. Colling stopped scrubbing and looked at me. His eyes were beady, black, glinting. I could see absolutely nothing in them, like they were those of a wild beast.
I'll do what I can. That's all I promise.
That's all any of us can promise.